In this episode, let's talk about unicycling clowns and people in gorilla suits. Also, let's talk about just how little it can take to cause you to completely overlook these two very unexpected things. How's it going? So during my lunch break, I swung by the hospital to visit a family member, and I really didn't have as much time as I needed, so I was a little worried about being a bit late to record this episode of the podcast. I actually made it on time, yay me, and all that, but I did cut it a lot closer than I meant to. So anyway, I hurried across the parking lot to return to the central office where I record these episodes. And it was this huge, enormous parking lot, like 9 million cars, and I was parked under section ZZ in the farthest corner. So I pulled out my phone while I was walking, and I wrote this quick little text to somebody. It was about a totally unrelated project, and it just said, "Hey, how are you doing on such and such?" But I didn't want that person to think I was unhappy with them or being pushy, so I started looking for an emoticon that went with that short little text. In the end, I picked an upside-down smiley face. I don't know what it means, but whatever. It seemed positive. And then I looked up, and I had walked easily across 10 lanes of the parking lot. I had actually crossed a street at one point, all without really noticing at all, and all just because I was focused on a little smiley face. And so I thought to myself, wow, this is exactly what I'm going to be talking about for this episode of the show. The limitations of the human mind, especially when confronted by some other task, event, or object. Today's topic is inattentional blindness, which is a failure to notice a fully visible, but totally unexpected object, just because your attention was focused on something else. If I struggle with this so much, even when I don't realize I'm struggling with it, then I bet a lot of others do too. With me for this episode is Dr. Ira Hyman, from Western Washington University. Dr. Hyman is this year's Psi Chi Distinguished Lecturer at the Western Psychological Association Convention. As you're going to hear in this episode, he's obviously very fascinated by his line of work. And that's really no wonder. I mean, who wouldn't be fascinated by studies involving unicycling clowns and other totally interesting and amusing details? Yeah, okay, I'm definitely capitalizing on unicycling clowns, just to keep your attention during this episode. So do I have your attention? Good. Then let's jump right into the conversation. I really am very excited to welcome Dr. Hyman to Psych Everywhere.
Good morning, this is Ira Hyman.
Hi, Dr. Hyman. This is Bradley. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. How are you, Bradley?
Great. Are you ready for a quick, fun interview today?
Quick and fun sounds wonderful.
Okay, great. How about let's start with just like some easy icebreakers. Could you tell me a little bit about your setting? You're at home right now?
Yeah, I actually am sitting at home at the moment. I usually spend Tuesday mornings at home doing some writing work here.
Cool. Do you have like a favorite item in the room, or I don't know, an award or a picture?
No. I mean, we live in Bellingham, Washington, so we're in the Pacific Northwest on the coast, and so we had a house built which has nice windows, part of which look over a forest, part of which look over the Puget Sound. So I'm sitting in a room where I can look out.
I can understand that. So I'm in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I don't have any pictures on the wall either. I don't really have much of anything in here, but I have a nice window I can see the river, and that seemed like enough.
Well, I like to see the world.
Right.
When I look up from whatever I'm working on or thinking about, I want to be reminded that there is a world out there.
Right. So do you have sort of getting on topic, do you have like a favorite crime or a courtroom TV show?
Yeah, now you've asked the absolutely wrong question because I don't watch any TV.
Oh, how about a book?
Yeah, and I'm not a crime person. I think of myself as a cognitive psychologist who happens to worry about naturalistic aspects or ecologically valid aspects of cognitive psychology. And thus, some of the things I do every now and then have ramifications for memory in courtroom situations or attention of witnesses in courtroom situations. But I don't think of myself primarily as a psych and law type person in that sense.
So how did you get interested in inattentional blindness?
So academic background for just a second. So my dissertation advisor a long time ago was Ulrich Neisser. And Ulrich Neisser is actually the person who invented the methodology for studying inattentional blindness. He created this situation where you could have overlapping visual events. He did it with triple exposing film, actually, back in the 1970s, and has people passing basketballs. You've probably seen versions of this. If you track and count the number of passes by one team, you fail to see someone else go directly through. So, I mean, when I was a graduate student, Neisser was no longer doing that work, but we, talked about that work at that time, what he termed selective looking, not inattentional blindness. So it's always been something that's sort of in my academic background. And I got interested in doing my own work on inattentional blindness because I became quite concerned about cell phone use while people were driving and walking, and whether or not they would get so focused on the cell phone conversation that it would lead to visual failures, failing to notice things that were directly in front of them. And so there was some nice work with driving already being done in driving simulators. And we started doing observations on our university campus of watching people walk while using cell phones and noticing how badly they walked in terms of their ability to traverse an open space. And then we just put other interesting things around to see if they would become aware of them. So I had a student who actually rode a unicycle, and we decided we'd have him ride his unicycle around and see if people would notice. And the student, tells me that I own a clown suit. And so the universe sometimes hands you a unicycling clown, and you should always take advantage of that when the unicycling clown appears. And so we find that people, when they're walking and talking on a cell phone, fail to notice a person in a clown suit riding a unicycle. We find that they fail to notice we hung dollar bills on a tree hanging over a pathway. They move their head to not get smacked in the face, but they don't notice that there's money on the tree. Your parents probably told you that money doesn't grow on trees, and our finding is that even if it did, you wouldn't notice it. So, we've been playing and researching problems of inattentional blindness having to do with cell phone use while people are walking, navigating through a complex environment. They don't become aware of things. They fail to notice things that might be important. And then you start thinking about how this might apply to potential eyewitnesses. And this was sort of the starting point for the work that I'll talk about at Western Psychological Association, is if most of the time in our lives we're engaged in whatever activity we're doing at that moment, whether it's, sitting, working in my office or being in a crowded classroom, or if I'm having a cell phone conversation with someone, or if I'm just driving my way through town, I'm typically not watching for accidents and crimes. I may be a potential witness if something happens, but I'm not watching for that to happen. And so we thought we should investigate this to take a look at whether or not people notice these things when they're not watching for them, and then also how that's going to impact their ability to essentially serve as witnesses, potential witnesses. Will they be able to tell you any information about the accident or the crime? Are they going to be able to identify the culprit in a crime situation? In doing this, I want to give a shout out to my student who helped me start down this pathway, and that's Alia Wolf, and that's WULFF. She was an undergraduate at the time at Western Washington University. We're a primarily undergraduate institution. She's now off working on her PhD at Tufts University with Ayanna Thomas. And, in conversations with her, we designed some of the original materials. We're using complex environment, give people a task to do while they're watching this complex environment, and have a theft happen directly in front of them with a culprit who walks right past the crime. And are they going to become aware? So, for me, this has been kind of a building project over, in some respects, my entire academic career. It's just that, I don't go into it primarily with sort of a worry about how I'm going to use this in terms of like being an expert witness or testifying in a courtroom situation. I'm just curious about when you're not watching for something, when do you become aware of it? Do you become aware of it? Mm-hmm. How is that going to impact your memory later on? That's the basic goal of this overall project.
So when someone experiences inattentional blindness and then they look up from their phone and they kind of snap out of it, are they aware of the time and the awareness that they lost, or do they think they're pretty accurate?
A wonderful question. Dan Simons and Chris Chabris refer to this sometimes as the illusion of awareness. We think we are aware of things that are happening around us, and we expect to notice unusual things when they occur. And that expectation is built on the fact that we have occasionally noticed unusual things when they happen, right? If something unusual happens, you notice it, you're like, yep, caught that. But the trick here is that for all of these sort of unusual things that we don't notice, we're unaware of the fact that we're unaware. And when it's pointed out to us, so in like and this is a classic finding in intentional blindness research, you talk to any researcher about this, that people's response when it's pointed out to them what they've missed is almost always sort of a nervous chuckle. They'll go, oh no, I didn't see that. And when we, had a unicycling clown out on, the main square of our university's campus, and people walk through and we ask them, do you see anything unusual? They don't offer the clown. We said, did you see the unicycling clown? At that point, they turn around and look, and they see a unicycling clown, and they give you that nervous chuckle, and they're like, no, I didn't see that. Wow. And so we're constantly surprised by these failures. When we're focused on one thing and we don't notice something, and then if it's pointed out to us, we're like, how did I not see that? And so we have this illusion that we are more in touch with the world, more aware of the world than we actually are. We think we see things, we think that we're aware of what's around us, but we fail to see things all the time. And that's really quite disconcerting if you're driving or navigating in some other fashion, where if you're doing a secondary task that's captured your attention and you fail to notice something that might be relevant for driving, avoiding accidents. It's also really disconcerting for potential witnesses, because part of this as well means that we not only expect ourselves to see something, but we expect other people to see something. So that if you were there when this happened, you must have seen this. You should be able to give me some sort of a description of what happened and what the guy looks like. There's that expectation of awareness, both for ourselves and for other people, and we're frequently not aware.
Okay, so there are, and you've already mentioned a few, but there are just so many of these really, really creative studies that investigate and manipulate participants' memories. And one that stood out to me, I read it a couple of times in some of your articles, was where researchers told the participants to watch the number of passes that were taking place during a basketball game. And then while the participants are doing that, which doesn't seem like it would be that complex of a distraction, and there's no technology really being involved here, but while they're being distracted, a woman with an umbrella just walks across the middle of the game, and the participants are distracted enough that they don't even see that, and they did it with a gorilla suit, and still many of them didn't see, which is hilarious. So my question was, do you have any particular real favorites in these memory studies that just stand out to you as being so awesome and creative?
So there's sort of it's almost at this point a mean game, it feels like to me, that researchers play with one another. So, I've known about the Umbrella Woman since I was a graduate student, because Neisser did that work with his students, Bob Becklin, back in the 1970s. And, I love the sort of revising of that Simon and Chabris did, where they did an Umbrella Woman and they did the person in the gorilla suit. So those things are always fun. So Dan Simons did another one more recently. He calls it the monkey business illusion. And when he did it, then he's like, once the stuff is coming out, it's in press. He sends me a link to a YouTube version of the video. He says, "Hey Ira, here's a new one for you to try." And in this one, it's again people passing a basketball. Guy in a gorilla suit goes through. So of course, now I'm going to see the gorilla, right? Because I've known about the gorilla. But he does two other changes in the video. So one of the players leaves the game, and the background, they must have done this against a green wall or whatever. The background changes color from, one color to another color. And it's a really dramatic change. And you don't see these things.
Wow, he distracted you with the gorilla.
Right. And so, this part of it is a lot of fun, right? Because, it's like Dan Simon sends this to me and I do the task because, I'm a serious psychologist and I know what's coming, right?
Yeah.
I know he's going to do something new and different. And nonetheless, he catches me. So I have shown our video that involves people walking through a crowded hallway. And this is our crime blindness one, the failure to see a theft. 3 women come in, they stand talking. One of them sets her backpack down on a chair. And there are a lot of people who pass through. And a guy comes through and stands near them for a little bit. And then he walks past and grabs the backpack and walks off with it. And we give people a task to do. We said, count the number of people in white T-shirts. And so I have presented this video at academic conferences with cognitive psychologists in the room who all know that this is an inattentional blindness talk. And so they know what's coming, right? And I tell them to count something, and they're all like, okay, we know what's coming, that there's going to be something unusual. And you get to the end, and you ask them how many people in white T-shirts, and they get more or less the right answer, and you ask them if they saw the theft, and, you have like 10% who saw the theft, and most of them didn't. And they're all like, yeah, I knew this was coming, and I still failed. And so this is a part of it that is a wonderful aspect of it for me, is that even all of us who understand this phenomena will fail when presented with a new situation. So that knowing about this work doesn't mean that you're immune from experiencing it. It just means that when you experience it another time, you're like, damn, caught me again. So, it's just, there's that aspect of it which just has a wonderful feel to it. As a person interested in the nature of human cognition, of attention, because even knowing doesn't protect you. You're still going to fail.
Do you think there's any way to practice being more aware?
No.
It sounds like they can't.
I mean, I might be wrong on this, right? I mean, I think that if you're engaged in divided attention task and you know both parts of the task, you can do both parts of it to a certain extent, but there's always a cost. Attention is a limited resource, and we can't track everything in the world around us. When we're dividing our attention between two things, we do each of those things less well than if we were only doing one thing. So I think that there is just a fundamental limit here on cognitive capacity. But nonetheless, at every moment, we feel like we're aware of the world around us, even though we're missing probably lots of stuff.
You're listening to Psych Everywhere. Up next, we'll discuss more about inattentional blindness. But first, real quick, let me tell you a bit more about Dr. Hyman. Ira Hyman is a professor of psychology at Western Washington University. He received his undergraduate degree from Duke University and his PhD from Emory University with Ulrich Neisser as his dissertation advisor. He received his undergraduate degree from Duke University and his PhD from Emory University with Ulrich Neisser as his dissertation advisor. He has published research on memory for song lyrics, the creation of false childhood memories, collaborative remembering, memory for traumatic events, inattentional blindness for unicycling clowns, and the intrusive thought of having a song stuck in one's head. He is the co-editor with Ulrich Neisser of Memory Observed, Remembering in Natural Context. Do you think there's always been the same limitation over time, or maybe like technology could be retraining our brains to be inattentive or anything like that?
I think the basic limitation has always been there, right? That I really do think that we're studying something basic about the human cognitive system. At least I hope that it's something basic about the human cognitive system we're studying. I think what technology has done has trained us to be constantly distracted, to be expecting our phone to buzz, or to be uncomfortable without checking our phone regularly, and so that we are constantly in this divided state, which makes having your attention become focused on whatever's happening on your cell phone to the exclusion of other stuff around you may be rather likely at this point. But this has always been the case, that we fail to become aware of things once we get focused on something in a complex environment.
So what can we do then to sort of better assure that witnesses of a crime aren't experiencing inattentional blindness when they're in the courtroom?
So I think, I've had some conversations with colleagues about this, and I don't actually know the real answer to this question yet. I think that this is an empirical question and an important one. But it feels to me, and this is one of the things we're starting to do in our studies, is you need to ask early in your interview with a potential witness the questions that have to do with your attention. What were you doing while you were in this situation? When did you become aware of the crime or the accident? And at that point, you really shouldn't ask questions from before the moment they became aware. You should only ask questions about the things they saw after they became aware. And this feels to me to be a crucial aspect of it. If we just ask every witness the same set of questions about, what happened before and what was the start of this like, and then what happened, we're putting them in a situation where they don't actually have memory information because they weren't aware of it at that moment, but nonetheless, they'll probably give an answer to the question. We see this in some of our data, is that they, see something rather late, but they'll answer questions about what might have happened ahead of time. And when they're doing that, they're giving erroneous information. They're giving information based on sort of schematic reconstruction of what's reasonable in the situation, about how they think it, or how they believe it must have gone, and then it becomes part of their memory. So that I think that the way, this is my hope, is that the way to forestall some witness errors may be by asking attention questions early in an interview with potential witnesses, and then being much more careful about what additional questions we ask, and only asking about the stuff they could possibly have seen once they are aware of it. Because the stuff from before that, they don't know, but they might answer the question anyway.
Here's a weird question, I think. So all these examples, I think, so far have involved distractions with sight. Does inattentional blindness also occur regarding sound or smell? Like listening to this podcast on headphones while walking across the street, is that going to cause someone to miss a cue?
Well, hopefully not. I will feel bad if that's the case, if they're listening. But a lot of the stuff like walking around and using your cell phone, the early stuff that we were doing was people having cell phone conversations. And so their eyes are up and moving around, but they don't become aware of things because that attention is on the auditory channel at that moment. Mm-hmm. And so, this actually goes back to the really classic work in divided attention, the dichotic listening and shadowing stuff, that if you're listening to stuff coming to one ear, you're unaware of the stuff coming to the other ear, and very little makes it through. And so there's good evidence that this matters in all of these domains. And there's some really nice stuff from Polly Dalton's lab in the UK about inattentional numbness. I really love this one as well. When you're doing a visual task and they've got little buzzer straps to your hand, and every now and then it buzzes, and did you notice the buzz that time or not? And when the visual task is compelling and involves a lot of attention resources, you're less likely to notice the buzzes on your hand. So that there's some really nice work showing that it goes across perceptual domains. That if your attention is wrapped up in one thing, you are, unlikely to become aware of unusual things in any of the perceptual domains. And then let me take it one step further. And that is that it doesn't have to be that your attention is focused on something in the external environment. It can be focused internally as well. So that if you are, deep in thought and working through something or doing a little mind wandering, even with your eyes open, you may fail to see the thing that goes right in front of you. In this sense, the classic example here is driving home and not remembering the trip, which means that you were probably thinking about something else as you were driving home, which a lot of us do. You get on autopilot to a certain extent. And when you're on that autopilot, you may be less aware of the world around you. Matter of fact, you have probably driven home and pull into the driveway and realize at that moment, oh, I meant to stop at the grocery store on the way home. I was supposed to pick this up. Many of us have done something along those lines because you get on autopilot and you're thinking about other things. And then when you're doing that, you're probably less aware of what's happening directly in front of you. There's some nice stuff, oh shoot, I've lost a person's name here, but showing that when people in a driving simulator drive the same route multiple times, they are less likely to notice something unusual on a later trial than if it's the only time they've driven that route. So that we fall into, sort of autopilot mode when we're doing some of this stuff. As an absent-minded professor, I can walk across campus, on my way to a class or a meeting and, be thinking about the thing I'm going to be doing next and not notice something important around me. There's another classic study, I think it's Darlene Latane, with an example, students in religion who were in one building and they were working on a lecture they were going to give on the Good Samaritan. So they have these people who are giving a talk about being the good person who stops and helps others, and then they're preparing this lecture. Now they're, a sermon, and they're supposed to walk to another building to deliver the sermon. And as they're walking to the other building, they're still thinking about this, and there's a person, pretending to be injured beside the walking path, and everybody walks right past and doesn't seem to see the person. And so, it was never seen as a study of unintentional blindness, right? But, from my perspective, looking back at that, it's not that they intentionally walked past the person without, stopping to help because they needed to be someplace else. It may very well be that they were internally focused on the sermon they were now going to deliver on the Good Samaritan and failed to behave like the Good Samaritan because they didn't become aware. This is a really deep attention limitation problem. And if you get focused on one thing, it can lead to failures in any perceptual domain, so that you're less likely to notice sounds, you're less likely to notice visual things, you're less likely to feel a buzzing or a touch on your shoulder. Smells and tastes are harder to play around with just because those things linger in the environment. But I think it's going to work out in pretty much all of these domains.
So are there any studies on this that actually failed and the participants continued to notice the detail they were expected to miss? There
may be, but they haven't been published because failures, this is the nature of, the publishing business, right, is that, our failures don't get published. In my lab right now, we're doing not these eyewitness things, but we're doing some very classic lab-controlled versions of inattentional blindness with things moving around the screen, computer screen. And we show that even if you tell the people that an unusual thing may happen sometimes, they may see it sometimes, but not other times. And so you can repetitively fail at these things, even in a very simple lab task. So I think that we're more likely to find the failures than we suspect. And this is because all of us continue, even experimental psychologists who ought to know better, continue to expect that our attention is going to be captured by unusual things. And the reason we have that expectation is because we notice when it happens, but we don't notice all the times that we fail. We're unaware of the times we're unaware.
Okay, so I have one more question. I had a couple of others, but you beat me to them. Because let's face it, we were not getting through this interview without dealing with Unicycling Clown. Like that was going to happen. So I'm going to turn it on its head a little. Is there anything good or useful about inattentional blindness?
Oh.
Like, is there a reason?
Yeah. So let's flip it around. And so the label that we use to describe this phenomenon, inattentional blindness, was coined by Mack and Rock and some of their work with, simplistic computer displays of this. And the focus of the term inattentional blindness is on the stuff that you don't become aware of. The term that Ulrich Neisser used when he was first developing this methodology of complex visual events and people passing basketballs is he used the term selective looking to emphasize that what's going on here is that you can get selectively focused on one event and not be distracted by other things. Mm-hmm. And so it's a question of which side of that coin you want to look at, right? And so one way of looking at it is failing to become aware of things that maybe you want to become aware of. But the flip side of it is with selectively focused attention, we are able to actually maintain focus on a complex task even when there are possible distractors around us. And this is actually something that's really basic and important about human nature, is that you want to be able to stay focused. I don't want to be constantly distracted by a small noise or a small visual change in the environment. I want to be able to stay focused on the task I'm doing right now. And so to that extent, it can be a very good thing, right? If you're playing a video game and it's a complex video game and you get really focused on that video game, so if you focus on that video game, you don't want to be distracted by somebody else moving around the room. Because if you do that, then you're going to lose the game because it's fast-paced. Mm-hmm. I don't play video games, but, I have once or twice and, usually lose to my sons. But, it's that sort of thing that we're also interested in. It's the ability to stay focused. Yes, there are many cases where it's important to become aware of unusual things. But we also routinely talk about the wonderful thing about being able to stay focused.
So of those two sides of the coin, you take the positive side?
Oh, it depends on the environment, right?
Yeah.
If I'm sitting in my office trying to get work done, then yeah, the ability to be selectively focused is a good skill. If I'm wandering, navigating my way through the environment, I'd like to have some attention capture happen by unusual things out there in the environment so that I know whether or not I'm at risk of being hit by a car. I'm a bicycle commuter generally, and so it is really crucial that I both stay focused on where I am on the road, but that I am aware of every other vehicle out there because I know that they don't always see me, so I have to constantly see them. And so yes to both. Both are important things, right? It's both important to be able to stay selectively focused. It's important to have our attention captured by unusual things nonetheless when those are relevant to the task we're doing. So there's no simple answer to that question of which one do I think is more important. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's a lot of fun to do research on the failures. Those are fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Psych Everywhere. Did you enjoy this episode? If so, I have some really great news. Dr. Hyman is actually just one of 8 Psi Chi Distinguished Lecturers this year. Briefly, allow me to introduce you to the others. First up, the Psi Chi Distinguished Lecturer for the EPA Convention in Boston, Massachusetts, is Dr. Steven Pinker. Unfortunately, the 2020 EPA Convention has been canceled at this time due to the coronavirus. But that shouldn't stop us from having a podcast episode with Dr. Pinker very soon, so stay tuned for that one. Next up is the Southeastern Psychological Association Convention, which this year is taking place in New Orleans. At that convention, the Psi Chi Distinguished Lecturer is Dr. Antonio Puente, who's going to speak about neuropsychology and what that has to do with the origins and the future of psychology. As it so happens, you may remember Dr. Puente. He was actually the very first guest speaker here on the podcast. The Southwestern Psychological Association Convention will be in Frisco, Texas this year. Psi Chi's distinguished lecturer there is Dr. Sarah Hill, who will talk about the psychological effects of birth control pills. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, this convention will now be postponed. The new tentative dates are August 27 through 30. The Rocky Mountain Psychological Association Convention will be in Denver, Colorado this year on April 16 through 18. There you can listen to Psi Chi lecturer Dr. Adriana Galvan speak about the ways that neuroscience can inform policy. The MPA convention is always in Chicago, Illinois each year. This year it will be April 23 through 25. There, Psi Chi lecturer Dr. Acacia Parks will talk about her journey to becoming involved in digital therapeutics at Happify.inc. The Western Psychological Convention, last but not least, will be in San Francisco, California on April 30 through May 3rd. There you can learn more about crime blindness and meet this episode's guest speaker, Dr. Ira Hyman, in person. As you can imagine, I'd really enjoy speaking with each and every one of these esteemed speakers for a future episode. So, that's exactly what I'm going to try to do. During the months ahead, I'm planning to interview each one of them so that you can learn more about their fascinating areas of psychology. I hope you'll go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. And if you're enjoying the show, or if you're really looking forward to a particular episode in the future, please write a brief review on Apple Podcast. I'd love to hear from you, and I might even read your review on a future episode of the show. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. That's all for now. I'll talk to you again. Actually, one other thing. As the coronavirus situation continues to develop, it is possible that some of these conventions may also be canceled. And it's equally possible that some of the distinguished lecturers may choose not to attend due to safety concerns with traveling. To stay up to date on this situation, visit www.psichi.org/COVID-19. Regardless of what the future has in store for these conventions, I don't see any reason why we can't go ahead and interview as many of these lecturers as we can. Stay safe out there and keep tuning into the show. I'll talk to you again soon. Copyright 2020, Psi Chi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. All rights reserved.